50 years ago, Alexander the Great set out on a quest that would change his life. A quest that would make Alexander's empire go down in history as undisputably one of the largest empires in the world, and a quest that would be and will be remembered forever. This is the final defining question, a question that has gone down through the ages as mysterious and undiscovered, a question that has never been answered. The question, was Alexander the Great really great? Today there is a debate going on, a debate that will change the world, or at least Maple Street School grade 5 history class, forever. The factors that will be going into answering this question will be Alexander's military tactics by Xavier, Alexander's empire by Eva, his impact in the world by Hannah, and finally an overview and conclusion by Ethan. We believe Alexander was great. He's clearly an honest, just, educated, and respectable man, supported by his quotes, "I'm not afraid of an army of lions led by sheep. I'm afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. And I'm indebted for my father for living, but for my teacher for living well." He was competitive, and he was driven towards his goal of world domination. There is nothing impossible to him who will try. Now is the time to answer this question. But here is another question for you. Who will win?
Alexander the Great does not deserve the title the Great. He was very full of himself, and there is no documented evidence of him caring about anyone besides himself. He took all of his anger out on others by either killing them or hurting them. He invaded parts of Asia and killed hundreds of innocent people to get more land for his empire. He also sulked in his tent for 3 days, pouting about his army who had deserted him. He made his men build bridges while getting shot by burning slate. Alexander the Great committed numerous acts of violence and destruction as a military leader, including destroying the ancient city of Persepolis and knocking down the prominent statues and religious figures. Alexander the Great had a bold, brash personality and a short temper. He drank heavily and resorted to violent means to solve even small dilemmas. This personality proved ideal for the military, but got Alexander into trouble amongst civilizations. He was responsible for the death of tens of thousands of his own men and for unnecessary wholesale slaughters and native people. How great is a king who prefers constant warfare over consolidating conquered territories and long-term administration, or often endangered his own life and the life of his men? Those are some of the reasons why I think Alexander the Great is not great.
Alexander the Great was even selfish when he was young. He wanted to be king so badly that he paid one of his father's bodyguards to assassinate his father, so he would become king of Pella. Even though his father loved him and called him a demigod because when he was born, he saw a snake in his bed that bit him. When Alexander the Great was king of Pella, he made women and children slaves. It was not enough to be king, so he had to take over a whole empire.
Alexander the Great made a great impression on world history today and should be known as a great leader. He helped spread knowledge and culture to other places in the world. He was one of the only people who helped spread the culture. At that time, the Greeks had a more complex democracy and lifestyle. He amassed one of the largest empires in history. If Alexander had not lived, world history would be changed, and some leaders would not be as great and powerful. He accomplished his goal to conquer Persia because his dad had not. When he was in his 20s, he set off to conquer India to become even more great than he was, but was forced to turn back. This all shows that he worked hard, was determined, is great, and wanted to be known in world history, like he is known today. He inspired later leaders like Napoleon Bonaparte and Julius Caesar. He showed these people how to become great, powerful, prideful, intelligent, and cunning rulers or leaders. He passed on his great leading skills to many other leaders who passed on his skills, and it went on and on. He was a smart man who looked up to his mother because his dad was not there, because he was at military campaigns and things like that. So he was not all of there. was not there all of the time for Alexander. Alexander the Great has made a large and great impact on world history today and should be remembered as someone great, powerful, and smart forever.
Alexander led his army through wars and over hard mountain terrain. His army countered a lot of countries, including Egypt, Persia, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Alexander led 48,100 men and commanded 120 ships with a crew of 38,000 men. His father, Philip II, taught him how to use the phalanx during the battle. The phalanx formation is 8 men wide and 36 men deep. The men in front hold their spears straight out in front of them, and the men behind them hold their spears straight up. The phalanx formation, the enemy could be killed at a safe distance. Alexander's weapons were also catapults, swords, and a bow and arrow. When Alexander's army was not fighting, they practiced and drilled a lot. Alexander conquered a large armies by using different military tactics.
Alexander mistreated his soldiers, enemies, and kingdom. When Alexander was 21, he took the throne of Macedonia, but soon after only used his power to conquer the east and completely neglected his own kingdom. Alexander ran his soldiers into the roughest terrain and forced them into the toughest battles. He made them fight the best defended forts and regions. For example, Alexander tried to attack an island by making a bridge where molten lava was launched at them for years. Alexander forced all his captured women and children into slavery, demanded and received the utmost allegiance and obedience from advisors, but he was often brutal towards them. He had an unusual temper and killed many of his allies too. Alexander drank excessively, which caused many rages and bad decisions. He ignored his people's needs and got poisoned. Why did that happen? Because no one liked him. His men left his army. Why? Because he abused and neglected his people and enemies.
Alexander was easily aggravated. He killed one of his soldiers because they disobeyed him. He was power hungry, so whenever he was mad, he'd do something uncalled for on rage. Alexander would always ride his horse, and his men would have to walk the whole empire. Alexander did nothing to conquer the empire. The only thing he did was kill King Darius and name 40 cities after himself. All these facts show that Alexander the Great was not so great.
Alexander the Great conquered about 22 countries. He was undefeated in war. In 11 years, Alexander the Great's empire was all the way from the Balkans to the Himalayas. Only Alexander the Great could do all this in such a short amount of time. Whenever Alexander the Great destroyed a city, he named it after himself, but only one of the cities of Alexandria is still called Alexandria, and this one is in Egypt. He may have named all of the cities Alexandria, and when he took those cities down, he did it with pride. Alexander the Great was a great leader because if you are just a good leader, you would have not been able to do as much as Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great is a good leader, but a bad person. Alexander was able to spread Macedonian rule across Egypt, Persia, and India for over 13 years. Alexander neglected his own kingdom and left for 2 years after taking over Neverlands and never returned home again. Heavy consumption of alcohol caused him to make poor decisions, which caused lots of problems. Alexander is not a good man. He might be a good leader, but he is not caring. He killed thousands of innocent people. Alexander is selfish. He renamed all of the cities he conquered after himself and didn't give any credit to his army. Alexander was loyal to his father. He acted just like him. He killed people and mistreated them. He made his men build a land bridge to fort while molten lead was being thrown at them. He slaughtered some of his men on the way. He also made his men march until they were tired out completely.
Alexander the Great was a great influence on what we know today in Rome. He had one of the biggest empires in the world. He took the throne at age 20, which is unbelievable at this time. He conquered the great king, but terrible, King Darius III, which had the biggest army ever, which is unbelievable. Alexander won the war when Darius put 5 times the army than Alexander, which goes to show how much he must have trained them. He never strayed. He was never a coward. He always was willing to take a risk and be brave. He was always willing to fight to the end, until he was forced to by his men, which cost him his life.
Go.
If Alexander the Great is not great, then why is he still remembered as great today?
So, they probably named him the Great after his great influence and how good his leadership was, not that he cared.
If Alexander was so great, then how do you feel about how he named every city he conquered after himself without giving his men any credit for basically doing everything for him? This is for both sides.
He was narcissistic and he renamed every city after himself, but he might have believed that was great.
As I said in the beginning of this, he's very full of himself, so that's why I think he did it.
He named all the cities after himself because of his drinking, because he drank a lot.
So, I think he said that because, he did all this stuff, he named it all, his name after all these countries because he was very selfish and he just wants to take all the credit and make sure that his army doesn't have any credit at all.
This is for both sides. So if you think he's so good or bad, how do you think the world would be different today if he hadn't have been there?
Even though I think that he wasn't so good, the world wouldn't have most of its knowledge about Greece without Alexander the Great.
This is for pro and con. Why did he kill his best friend and what did he do to make his best friend mad?
But if he killed him, it was probably because he didn't agree with Alexander, and Alexander was too single-minded to just accept other opinions.
Okay, he probably killed his general because he disobeyed him, and Alexander he demanded obedience, and when someone disobeyed him, he was probably drunk and really angry.
All right, the con side. If Alexander was not great, why did he take in Greek culture and knowledge instead of destroying it?
He probably did that because he might be he is a good leader, but might be a mean person. But he probably wanted his slavery and everything, his cities to have education at least and be smart.
He kept the Greek knowledge because he was truly Macedonian, but his father wanted him to be Greek. So that was the one place that he really didn't want to destroy, and that's probably why he kept the knowledge of Greece.
This is for the pro side. Why did Alexander hate Persia?
A lot of things. I mean, he just hated everything. That was how he went. Didn't like country. Didn't like the city. He would kill everyone in it or put them in slavery, and then he would name it Alexandria.
So first of all, the leader of Persia was Darius,
and he hated Alexander. They had, I think, a previous wars where Alexander won, and Darius wanted to kill Alexander, and that's the reason why he hated Persia.
150 years before, there had been a Persian battle of Greece where they won, and they tipped over the Acropolis, so Alexander wanted some revenge.